So this is Reef Check. We're citizen science scuba divers. So my job involves training volunteer divers, volunteer citizen scientists to go down there and collect ecological data on the health of our oceans. And we are primarily interested in kelp forests. That's kind of what the diving is around here. They're remarkably beautiful ecosystems that divers in California are one of the few people that really get to enjoy them and all their wonderfulness. They're an ecosystem that we've seen a lot of change in, which in the past 5 or 6 years, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. But that's what we do. We're citizen science divers that check on the health of the kelp forest. And kelp forests are really extremely complicated ecosystems, and they have a lot of moving parts, a lot of overlapping parts, a lot of fish and invertebrates and algae, and all that life kind of makes this web of life, which gives the ecosystem biodiversity and gives it strengths and resilience against change. And we've seen a lot of change in the past couple of years. So the first one, or the one we noticed first anyways, was sea star wasting disease, which really decimated a lot of different types of sea stars, but in particular, these sunflower stars, which if you have never seen one, they're incredible. They're about 3 feet across and they're adult size, and they don't move like starfish. Like a normal starfish moves so slowly, it's imperceptible. These things, you can see them kind of like moving across the seafloor a little bit slower than a Roomba, I think. But starting in late 2013, massive disease killed off almost all of the sunflower stars in our area, as well as a lot of other ones. The next thing we noticed was a huge explosion in the population of purple urchins. Now, purple urchins are kind of the villain in this story, but I do want to point out they are a native species. They are, a healthy part of a functioning kelp forest ecosystem, just like squirrels in a forest. But if you had, too many squirrels, they overpopulated and ate all the nuts, maybe you wouldn't have any trees. But anyways, we saw a huge explosion in purple urchins. And I should also point out that it looks like one of these lines kind of caused the other line, and we do think they're related. But these urchins that we saw, say in 2015, the size that they were at that time meant they were actually born roughly 2 years earlier, before the onset of sea star wasting disease. So we're to this day, we're not quite sure how all that played out. The other thing that I think I should mention is sea otters, right? So sea otters used to be really abundant all along the coast of California. They were hunted to near extinction in the late 1800s, early 1900s. In fact, we thought they were extinct until they built Highway 1 down through the Big Sur coast, and they found a remnant population of 30 otters. Today, those 30 otters have expanded almost up to San Francisco Bay and down a little bit past Point Conception, but that still is a little fraction of their historical range. And so when we talk about kelp forest ecosystems, otters eat urchins, so they're thought of to be a control on urchins. And so when we talk about kelp forests, it's important to keep this in mind. A couple other things that happened. So one was, remember that drought? Well, that drought was caused by a huge high pressure system that sat off our coast for a year and a half, called the blob. And the blob was aided along by an El Nino event. So we had basically 2 years of really warm water. And warm water can be bad for a number of reasons. It can stress marine organisms like sea stars. It can also produce poor nutrient poor water that can be bad for kelp. So that definitely had it in several impacts. So that's what we saw. So after we had this huge explosion of purple urchins, we had these warm water events. We saw just a huge decrease in kelp populations. In particular, on the North Coast, where we lost upwards of 95% of the kelp coverage up there. And then, just kind of the pieces going down the line, the abalone population just disappeared, just starved. And we watched it. We watched them, first come out of their hiding spots, roving around where it's not so protected and safe, looking for food, moving them shallower. Then we saw their body size shrink, and you'd pop them off the rocks, and there would be a big shell with just a little bit of meat in it. And then we saw them, wash up on shore or just flipped over dead on the bottom. It was something that, as I grew up as an abalone diver, it's really the way I got into being a marine biologist. It was really heartbreaking to see, and it's a way of life for many people up on the North Coast. So the point with all this is that all these things are connected. And John Muir knew this. He said that when one tugs at a single thing in nature, he finds it attached to the rest of the world. And so all these different things have effects. So ocean temperature can affect sea stars, can affect kelp forest, sea otters can affect urchins. They're all kind of connected and related. And so what we saw was that when we pulled on all these strings, the ecosystem was really transformed from this lush kelp forest habitat with a ton of biodiversity, ton of life, to a much more barren environment. This is a little bit like what that looks like. So this is a kelp forest in Monterey. You can actually see the kelp's kind of been gnawed on. It's been chewed a little bit, but there's still a lot of kelp there. You often have different layers. There's like understory kelp. And going a little bit shallower, and you can see the urchins just really munching everything, climbing up the stalks. First they eat, the soft algae, kind of the leaves of the trees, and then as it goes on, they'll eat the, more like the bark, until finally it just looks like this, complete urchin barren. And this is a lot of what the North Coast looks like, just kind of miles and miles of habitat that has gone from being super robust environments to just really, really barren. And so we've seen these effects kind of throughout the state, and they've kind of varied a little bit. So on the North Coast, as I mentioned earlier, we looked at sea otters, right? So we don't have them that far north, right? They haven't been up there in over 100 years. We lost sunflower stars due to sea star wasting disease. We saw a huge explosion in purple urchins, and then we lost 95% of the kelp and most of the abalone too. On the Central Coast, we do have sea otters, so that's definitely helped. We did lose those sunflower stars. We saw an increase in urchins, not quite as dramatic, but still pretty dramatic. And we lost some of our kelp. So in the Central Coast, it's a much more mixed message, where some areas are barren. Some of you who are divers have seen this, and others are still kind of hanging on. And there's a little bit of variation from year to year. And we've kind of watched, a lot of these barrens kind of grow over time. Southern part of the state, there's still a lot of barrens, so there's no otters down there. And we lost the sunflower stars. That was coastwide. But they have some other urchin predators down there. They have lobsters and sheephead. So those can kind of help keep the population in check. So we're kind of different. We're definitely seeing different effects in different regions. So what are we doing about it? So in Monterey, we launched an urchin experiment. And the explicit purpose of this experiment was to measure what density of urchins, how many urchins you had to remove from an area before kelp would come back. But the implicit objective was just to see if we could get a bunch of recreational divers to go out there with hammers and smash a bunch of urchins, and to see if kelp would come back. So here's our study area. It's off of Lovers Point State Park. It's inside of a marine conservation area. So we had to get a permit and all that. And the study design was basically to like take 20 rocks, basically 20 sections of reef that were surrounded by sand, and at each one reduce the urchins down to a certain density. And then to see like where along the kelp came back, right? So these are just the plot numbers. But so we have 2 at like this density, 2 at that density, and this is logarithmic, so it basically doubles every single time. And so our idea was that we would be able to like figure out like, okay, well, right in the middle, right at 1 urchins per meter is what you have to do to get kelp to come back. Here is an example of one of these reefs. So it's just a rock surrounded by sand. And the target density for this particular reef is 0.075 urchin square meters, which means on this entire rock, we were only allowed to leave 2 for the experiment. So that's a fairly low density. And we did see a little bit of kelp come back on this one, so that was definitely encouraging. But after a year on, we kind of realized a couple things. So one, the urchins move around a lot, and we thought sand would be a really good barrier, and it was a pretty good barrier. But urchins definitely cross sand. So if those blue dots are target densities, the orange ones is basically the average, where we'd go back every 2 weeks, and when we went back after 2 weeks, that's what the average density was. So it wasn't really feasible to maintain urchins at really, really low densities. Let me see, a couple other things that we learned. We did see a little bit of kelp come back. We're more hopeful for next year. Kelp tends to grow in the spring the most, or recruit in the spring, so we're kind of excited for that. We kind of got a late start doing the big storms. And we also saw a lot of red urchins. So we're still kind of like digesting the results of that experiment. Now, up on the North Coast, where the problem is the most severe, we were interested in doing a similar study up there. It's a different ecosystem up there. It's bull kelp instead of giant kelp. It's a different kind of canopy tree. But we didn't think it'd be that valuable to recreate that experiment. We felt we'd already learned enough. And so instead, we're going just for a kelp forest restoration project. So this is a much bigger project, and whereas the experiment in Monterey, at least explicitly, is designed to kind of measure the scientific density in which kelp comes back, this project, it's more of like a pilot project to see if we are able to clear plots, large plots, and have kelp come back. So we have 3 sites in Mendocino County, and we're partnering with commercial fishermen to have them clear basically like a large plot at each of these 3 sites, about 10 acres. So as before, when we're, those rocks were like, say 30 square meters, about the size of this room maybe. This is more like a 10-acre plot, so much larger areas. And we're not going to mess around with like target densities. We're just going to bring them down to as low as possible. So we want to get them to at least less than 2 urchins per square meter. And we're going to do this at 3 sites. The middle site, Casper Cove, where there's going to be a combined recreational effort and commercial effort, and Josh is going to talk about that next. And we're really excited about that partnership too. But here's an example of one of our plots. So we're going to take this area, we're going to divide this 10-acre section into 30-meter by 30-meter plots, and just mark it off as cables and go down there and clear it all. We're going to start pretty soon. The project was funded at about 4:03 this afternoon. So it's really, thank you. Yeah. So we're pretty excited about it. And our hope is that if we pull enough of these strings, we can have a role in transforming these ecosystems back from these barrens to these kelp forests, and in particular provide seed stock, provide spores for the rest of the coast if ocean conditions do change and sunflower still comes back. or does come back, we want there to be enough of this kelp around to be able to repopulate it. And there's some reasons why we think that that is. So we talk about kelp as a forest, but in many ways it's more like a grassland. Kelp is it can bounce back super, super quickly. Something ecologists call, something ecologists call resilience. So like if a forest burns down, it might take 100 years to grow back, but a grassland can come back within a season or within a year. And that's what kelp is like. Given the right conditions, giant kelp grows almost 2 feet a day at its maximum. And so these ecosystems can bounce back really, really quickly. And even though kelp, we have seen this big transition, it is actually a very robust ecosystem. And it can live in very harsh environments. And so it's resistance. It's resistance to change. It can kind of take a beating and keep on going. It just needs that web of life. It just needs that biodiversity to hold on. So we're helpful that with those factors and with us going and working on it, we can kind of restore these ecosystems to these like beautiful kelp forests that we all know. I just want to thank all the Reef Check citizen science divers, some of which are here today, but all the work we do is done because of volunteer divers that are willing to brave the cold waters and go out and make a difference. So I always want to thank them, and all of our data, if you're interested in any of this, is all available online at data.reefcheck.org. It's our public web portal. And with that, I will say thank you.
When's the training coming up for Reef Check?
There's a bunch of training. Yeah, so there's trainings in Monterey, in San Francisco, in April, May, June. Yeah, yeah. Sign up. Yeah, yeah. California Academy of Sciences. Yeah, yeah. And the one in Monterey is at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Uh, 16. Yeah.
So if you see the kelp start to come back,
Uh-huh.
how will you know what the density of the urchins are?
In the rest,
Around
you mean like it?
next experiment.
I mean, I think we're less concerned about figuring out what the density is. We just really want kelp to come back. I mean, I think one of the lessons from the first experiment was that like, you're kind of deluding yourself if you think you can hold something to a certain density, like 2 versus 2.5 or 2 versus 3 urchins per meter. So might as well just see like, well, if we just clear it as much as we can, is it gonna work? So, yeah. Right. Uh-huh. Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that they do kind of move that fast, or, in Monterey, the experiment was really built around the idea that you have isolated reef with sand all the way around, and urchins don't like to cross sand. They don't hold on very well. Whereas in the North Coast, or most areas, are just solid reef, so you're really not going to get any kind of barrier. So even at sand, we saw them kind of move across. So it's going to be, I think, a fairly legitimate effort just to clear these areas down to a low density. And kind of one of the ways we've designed it is that if you think of it like a big rectangle, you have the shore on one side, you have sand on the other, because a lot of these coves have sand down the middle, and the other side is kind of a freshwater, like where the river comes in. So you really only have one side that you have to work at, and then the plot should be big enough that we should be able to see like how quickly they get back in. So it might be the case where like it might kind of turn into a natural density experiment anyways, because we can measure the density gradient along our along the coast where our plot is, and see if kelp comes back on one side and not in the other. Yeah, sure.
Are the urchins that you're taking out for the commercial fishermen or
Yes.
Ending up in the commercial market for those people?
Yeah, so good question. So unfortunately, purple urchins are not really economically viable. They're too small. The ones in barrens are also, they're not really starving, but they don't have a lot of meat in them. So they're just not very commercially viable. You've probably heard there is a company, Urchinomics, that is doing urchin ranching, where they're taking these urchins and bringing them on shore and feeding them and trying to make a market for them, which is great. I don't think it'll be, it's not the entire solution. I don't think it can scale up big enough to really address it, but I think it could be part of the solution. Yeah. It's a little varied. So the commercial guys will just be taking them, yeah, under their license. In Monterey, our scientific collecting permit allows us to smash them, and I will let Josh talk about the recreational effort because that's his coup. Yeah.
That last sample video that you showed,
Yeah.
it looks really barren.
Yes.
Barely any help at all.
Yeah.
Yet it's sporting, that area seems to be sporting a large number of urchins. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering what else they eat besides kelp.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you're an urchin, what you want to do is you want to hide in your little hole, all protected, and just wait for drift kelp, right? And that's what an urchin will do, given its druthers. If it runs out of food, then it has to go walking around on the reef looking for food, and that's a much more dangerous proposition for an urchin. And then as it runs out of like the soft like blades of kelp, it has to resort to like lower and lower grade foods, or less desirable, I should say. So there's like a pink calcified algae that grows on the rocks. They'll eat that. There's kind of a red encrusting algae. There's also just kind of like phytoplankton. Like urchins have this property of being able to survive for long periods off of very small amounts of food. I mean, there's been studies that have shown very long lifespans. Sometimes when you do get a dense population of urchins that are not very healthy, that haven't been eaten a whole lot, you do see urchin disease come in and have a big role. And we have seen signs of that happen at some locations. So that could be a factor in reducing the herd, but we're not sure yet. Yeah. All right. Oh yeah, that's right. Thanks. Yeah, well, it's a good question, and I think part of it is, I think they are. I mean, if you look at Monterey, you do have a lot more kelp you have in up on the north coast. I think the sea otters are probably a part of that. The other thing is, like I was mentioning about the commercially viable urchins, these urchins don't really have a lot of meat in them, and sea otters know what they're doing, and so you'll see them dive. And it's like, so in Monterey, where you'll have a kelp forest next to an urchin barren, they won't eat the ones in the urchin barren. Sometimes they'll even go and they'll grab one, they'll bring it up, they'll crack it open, and they'll look at it and throw it back, and then they're gonna go somewhere else. And they'll do that, and they'll do like these little kind of searching dives until they find good urchins. And they eat a lot more than urchins. Urchins are actually a fairly small component of their diet, at least historically. I think that's changing as the urchin population has grown. But so I think sea otters do play a role, but it's not like the silver bullet that I think we were kind of hoping. It's a good question though. Yeah.
So what are some requirements you would need to be a reef check diver?
Reef check diver. So the minimum requirements are you have to be a certified scuba diver with at least 30 dives, 15 of which need to be in California or some other cold kelp forest environment. And yeah, did I say minimum age is 16? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. All right, any other, oh, here we go. Yeah.
So if you're throwing out urchins, does it seem like you're throwing out
Yeah, I think, sure, yeah, so yeah, that's actually good. So the question was, if we're removing the urchins, is it gonna have to be, is there some predator that will kind of come in there and take over that role, or is it just gonna have to be like constant work? So I think on the North Coast, where we've really lost our two predators, we've lost urchins, we've lost sunflower stars. And there are a couple other, like rock crabs will eat them, leather stars will eat them, but none of those don't seem to be like major predators or have a major control effect. At least that hasn't been scientifically observed. So yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that we're basically buying time. We're kind of clearing these plots. We're having kelp come back, and we are kind of holding those until the ecosystem has a chance to change, and then that will be the catalyst for, like that spore bank can kind of repopulate that area. But there is one more piece of it, which is super interesting, which is that like a kelp forest is really a stable state. Like that slide where I said there's no analog, like it really survives. And urchins, like I said, what an urchin wants to do is hang out and just eat algae that drifts by. So if they're fed, if they're given food, they just kind of hunker down and don't move around. So you will see areas that are lush kelp forests and areas that are complete barrens and just like a line down the middle. And all the urchins on the margin are like fat and happy. And all the ones like 6 feet over are miserable and they're like roaming around. And the kelp forest, and you go into the kelp forest, and there's no urchins in there, very, very few. And kelp can grow a lot. So just having kelp there can actually like sustain like the kelp forest, even if there's not a lot of predators. That's a good question too. These are all good questions.
The videos in the North Coast with the different depths, is water depth a factor in controlling the urchin populations, or is that?
Yeah. I mean, it's very complicated and dynamic. So that was actually in Monterey where you saw kelp out deep, urchins in shallow. Other times it's the reverse, where there's urchins in shallow and kelp out deep. And it can relate to wave action. It can relate to exposure. I'm not even really sure. There's sometimes like you just look at it and you scratch your head and you're like, well, why is there kelp there and urchins there? I don't really know. So yeah, complicated. Yeah, Lauren. Yeah.
What is the reproduction rate of urchin? Do they reproduce better in certain conditions, and is that part of the equation at all?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like, so probably the biggest part of this story that doesn't get talked about is that there was sometime around 2013, early 2013, there was like a massive urchin recruitment where urchins just spawned and made like orders of magnitude, like 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more urchins. And that is not well documented. Like we don't have a lot of data from that time period on like urchin larvae. We just know that happened because we saw them all 2 years later when they're about quarter size or so. So we don't really know what caused that, but it's pretty common for kelp forests for this particular ecosystem. It's a very dynamic ecosystem, and that's just kind of how it goes with these organisms. They kind of go along at their like kind of low rate, and then 1 year, for whatever reason, they'll have like a massive spawning, and they cover everything. And 1 year's barnacles, and you go down there, and there's just barnacles covering everything. And then 2 years later, they're gone. And then like a couple of years later, there's like Kellis whelks. There's Kellis whelks everywhere, and like all of a sudden, like 2 years later, they're gone. So it's not uncommon for this kind of dynamic ecosystem to go through massive changes like that. But I think this story, it's a combination of the massive recruitment, the poor growing conditions due to the warm water, and then the loss of predators, in particular, sunflower stars. Yeah.
Is there a chance that the sunflower star will come back, or is there any talk about reproducing it from so far to the north?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what we're all hoping. The problem is the disease is still out there. It's not very well understood. When we do see sunflower stars, they tend to die. I mean, there do seem to be some out there. There is talk about listing them on the Endangered Species Act, which would be super sad. But it's just not something we really have, at least at this point, not something we can really do or control. We can't reintroduce them because the disease is going to take much over and back over. They're pretty sparse right now, which is kind of devastating because they were fairly common for a long time. Yeah.
In the previous scenario, we said there's forest and air
Yeah.
and then happy fat
Yeah.
urchins. Do they defend
there interaction between the urchins where the fat and happy ones?
Not that I know of. I mean, it's plausible. I mean, what you will see is like the margin will be just, you know, like urchin. It'll be a dog pile. It'll be urchins on top of urchins. So just, I mean, I don't know if it makes a wall or a barrier, and they do encroach a little bit, but generally, like if the kelp is growing, you know, again, it can grow 2 feet a day. So if it's growing, then I don't know, I can just feed them all. But this has been something that's been observed, you know, for sort of since some of the earliest studies on kelp forest, people have witnessed these kind of margins, and sometimes they can be stable for years. So yeah. All right, I'm gonna. Oh wait, sorry. One more question, then I'm gonna hand it off to Josh. Yeah. 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 Well, so I'm gonna actually let Josh answer that because he is the expert. All right. Thanks. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
The Watermen Alliance is a delegation, really. We have members from a bunch of different spearfishing clubs or consumptive clubs. After the MPA process was done, you know, we had this group of divers. We're all really passionate about diving. We're passionate about the ocean. We're involved politically. We go to the commission meeting. And so it really just kind of turned into a really convenient way for all of the clubs to keep each other informed of what was going on with each other. So we have clubs in San Diego that are trying to protect our access to children's pool. We have clubs in Santa Barbara, the Santa Barbara free divers who are on the lobster FMPA. I was until recently the Abbott representative on the North Coast. And we all know what happened to that. So I was happy representing divers in abalone fishing, working with the department to come up with enforceable regional regulations and things like that. And then as Dan mentioned in his timeline, around 2014, a lot of things started changing. And it actually happened a little bit before that. And the way I was told was that in 2013, there was a mass spawning event of the purple urchin in Sonoma that just washed up on shore. And it wasn't a local event, it happened to the entire county. So that's why they figured it was a mass spawning event offshore that washed up. And then the same thing happened in 2014 in Mendocino. So then, right around 2014, the sun stars died off. Because of the El Nino, the kelp was receding. So now anytime the kelp tries to come up, the urchin just dogpile on it. So in 2014, the department came out with a publication or a paper that they called The Perfect Storm. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was pretty widely distributed. It was pretty widely seen. It's been talked about a lot over the last few years. And the first meeting that Dr. Captain presented that to was the Recreational Abalone Advisory Committee, which I'm on. The meeting was in Southern California. I remember she read the paper, and the first thing I said was we should raise the recreational limits on urchin. And she asked me why. And I said, well, so the recreational divers could get out there and start harvesting and getting them out of the water. We need to like raise an alarm. And so I think she misunderstood me, thinking that at the time that recreational divers could stop this. But what I was thinking was that it would raise an alarm in the public. It would raise public awareness to the situation that's going on. Any time you raise the regulation for take on anything, it raises alarms in places. So my thought was really just raising the public flag, like, hey, pay attention to this. So in 2014, every time they gave that presentation, I asked them to raise the recreational regulations, and through talking with them and trying to explain to them what I thought was the benefit or what we would get out of it, nobody saw the benefit of it, and it just got worse and worse and worse. In 2018, through some discussions with the department, I believe some of the words used were, it can't get any worse. So, talking with the commission, in 2018, the commission raised the recreational take from 35 individual percolers to 20 gallons. And when I was working with them, the purpose of doing that was so that I could, or others could organize recreational events and get recreational divers up there removing purple urchin in mass. And the idea was the positive precedent it would create, that people are involved and people are doing this. The public support of the people doing this and getting involved would be a catalyst for some science to come in later for some funding. So we started doing the events, the recreational events in 2018. At the same time, Watermen's Alliance, I started doing some fundraising. And from recreational divers, I got an enormous amount of money, more than I ever thought I would. I think I got $85,000 from recreational divers from different places. Different clubs were holding tournaments and donating the money. SCAN put up some money. SCAN is the Sonoma County Abalone Network. They put up some money. Some other organizations put up some money. So on top of that, I got a $25,000 grant from Mendocino County Fishing Game and a $20,000 grant from Sonoma County Fishing Game. And when I was collecting the money or raising the money, what I said, because on the Watermen Alliance, we're all volunteers. Nobody's paid. We don't get paid. The most we could get would be like reimbursed for gas or something or a hotel. So we don't get paid. 100% of the money that everybody donated went to the commercial effort, went to the commercial divers. So in 2018, we raised a total of $130,000 to pay the commercial divers to go out and harvest the purple urchin. At the same time, we're doing the recreational events on every other month. And it's a huge task. Some of you have been to them. I know Genevieve's been to one or two. Some others have. It was huge, and they got bigger. And part of that, the department didn't think that recreational divers would participate. The department thought, and you know, recreational divers or volunteers are kind of I don't want to say untrustworthy, but you can't really count on them because it's volunteers. You're not paying them. They have no commitment. They can come and go as they please. So the department thought that interest would be small and that interest would fall away after a short period of time. But what ended up happening actually was that we got more interest. And we had 100 divers at some of these events. And they became huge events where with 100 divers and they're out there harvesting the purple urchin in bags, we had to have kayakers to go out and get the full bags from them and bring them empty bags so that they could keep harvesting. The kayakers have to bring the bag back to shore. And I don't know if you've ever tried to paddle a kayak with 40 pounds of urchin on it, but it's not easy, and especially once you get into the surf zone. So I mean, there were these huge events, and then once the kayakers got to shore, we had to have volunteers on shore to take the bags from them and give them empty bags to give back to the divers, people on shore. So in the creation of that regulation, I worked it out with the department that they didn't include anything specifying the condition of the 20 gallons. So when we got the urchin to shore, we crushed them in a bucket. The department asked us not to crush them in the water because there was a concern that they might spawn in the water, right? So we agreed to remove them from the water and crush them on shore. They agreed there was no condition specified. Also, I asked them not to put a possession limit on it because I'm going to be driving down the coast with a truckload of crushed urchin, you know, and so that was the deal. And we went on with that. And people were supposed to be looking for funding. People were supposed to be finding ways to pay these commercial divers. And we did that for a couple of years. And it was just nothing was changing. The money wasn't coming from anywhere else. And so in 2019, they raised the regulation from 20 gallons to 40 gallons. So now the recreational limit on purple urchin in Sonoma, Mendocino, and Humboldt is 40 gallons of purple urchin. It's a lot. I guarantee you, no recreational diver is going to pull 40 gallons of purple urchin because when we crush them in a bucket, they crush in a ratio of 5 to 1. So you can fill a 5-gallon bucket and crush it down and then do that 5 times and pour it into one 5-gallon bucket. So that's basically 200 gallons of urchin now as you live. So what they did for what happened was nothing was changing. Nobody was funding the project. The removal events got to be a huge liability. And we had a couple of situations that happened. My heart was just like at these events, I was just a ball of nerves. Art was there once. We had a missing diver, you know, and it wasn't. All the events turned out to be nothing. It was just someone who didn't like where they were diving and went somewhere else and didn't tell anybody. But we had to evacuate Casper Cove. All of our divers, all of Humboldt State University divers, all the kayakers, everybody, we had to evacuate Casper Cove or Bend Inlet to get everybody out. And I was just dying inside. And when that lady came walking out, Tristan caught a tear in my eye. I was like, it's a lot. And so the recreational events, the way that we were doing them, could not be sustained. So in November of last year, with the recreational limit so high, I switched to crushing. You know, it's much safer. It's for the divers, for us, it's incredibly safer. For the logistics of an event, it's way more safe. than trying to carry these huge bags. We had divers, scuba divers also don't understand, like, those things are dead weight. So we had a couple of scuba divers try to come up with 4 bags on them and try to carry it with their BC, and they could barely float. They were lucky they had oxygen in their tank to make it back to shore, you know, so the events they were going couldn't keep going like that. So we started crushing, and I was talking with the department about coming up with a regulation, and as soon as we started crushing, we came up with an agreement. And so Friday, the department voted to allow crushing, and this is the slide you see behind me right now. This is a memo from the executive director to the director, and they're describing the regulation. I didn't bring the whole regulation because that's 6 pages long, so this describes the regulation. And in yellow, what you basically see is the change that they're making is to temporarily remove the daily bag limit to facilitate underwater culling of purple sea urchins by recreational divers in Casper Cove. So this is only in Casper Cove, from the north point to the south point, anywhere in the cove, and this is only purple urchin. And now the important thing, though, is in red, is to determine if this activity can help. Okay? So between me and the director of the Marine Region, he has challenged me. He has challenged me. Well, I won't say he doesn't believe, he's very hopeful. But he's asked me to show, he's asked me to prove that recreational divers want this, that recreational divers will participate in this, and then we'll make a difference, a positive impact, not a negative impact. So Reef Check right now is working like nights and weekends. They're going to be very busy for the next few weeks because they've got the science contract now. They have to come up with the protocol. And so I met with John Freewald and Tristan today up in Sacramento. And so they're going to come up with a protocol for us recreational divers to follow that will fit into their scientific study so that they can monitor what effect we have and they can document the effect of it, whether it's positive or negative or what happens. So part of the challenge for us as recreational divers, if divers just go out there and do whatever they want, number one, we won't be able to document it. So it won't matter. We'll lose what we have. If divers start going other places and just being anarchists and doing whatever they want, or not following the suggestions, everything that's going to come out right now is going to be a voluntary protocol for these divers. Basically, the department lifted the recreational limit in Casper Cove so that we can crush in Casper Cove legally, right? But they're doing it because they want data. The people that are doing this want data. So if we don't help supply the data, they're not going to do it. There was an emergency regulation, so this regulation will expire in 6 months. We expect them to extend it for 3 months twice, which would make this valid for a year. And so somebody was asking me, like what's going to happen if divers start crushing everywhere? Well, then after 6 months, they're going to let this expire if they don't cancel it before that. It depends on how crazy people get. The challenge to us it's a call, it's all hands on deck. The challenge to us as recreational divers is to show them that we want this to happen and that we will participate in it. And then Reef Check's challenge is to show the effects of it, whether it's beneficial or not. And if all of those things happen, then they'll extend this and by next year they'll put a permanent regulation in place, or not permanent, but a full-on regulation and go through the entire regulatory process. And then we might get more areas. Once we clear Casper, you know, the thing of the commercial diving has always been that we need recreational divers as well, because the commercial divers can't get all the way up against shore. They're tied to a boat, they're on an air supply, they have to float the bags of urchin. So we always thought that we would need recreational divers to get between shore and where the commercial divers can get up to. So the question is how many divers are going to participate in this? And in the department's eyes, the level of success is going to be the amount of participation, the amount of useful data produced. So that's going to be a voluntary reporting system. We're talking about that right now, what that's going to look like and how that's going to happen. And then if it has an effect. So what we're talking about right now is an online reporting system. The department is working with TNC to come up with some kind of online reporting system. Reef Check has to come up with what protocol they want, what they want us to report. But the idea is that it'll be very simple. What we want to know is like what day you dove, how many hours you dove, how many urchin you think you killed, and where, basically. There might be a few other things, but basically we want to keep it as simple as possible for you. But what I'm trying to express is the importance of that reporting and the importance of accuracy in that reporting. Okay, if people are making stuff up, then the data is no good. And it shows in the data. Don't think that they can't look at the data and see that you know, if everybody else is doing this and then you do this, it shows, you know, so the accuracy of the data and the amount of data that we produce is going to be important. So we were brainstorming today. It's going to take time for Reef Check to come up with this protocol. So what I brainstormed, what I talked with them about today, I'm going to go out there within the next week or so, and I'm just going to throw a red buoy on the south side of Casper Cove. And so for now, what we're asking divers to do is just go to that red buoy and dive around that red buoy and work your way out from that red buoy. So if you go to that red buoy and nobody's been there, you should drop right down on the anchor and just start working around. And then once you clear your area, somebody will drop down and swim over to it, and then they can start working on that one. You know, and just clear, keep it, just grow the clearing, expand the clearing, right? Should be easy enough. And by May, Reef Check will have a full protocol. By mid-April, I think we'll have a full protocol that we'll have. And in May, on the weekend after Mother's Day is what date? We're going to have the first event. We're going to just do a big, we're going to try to get every club, every diver that's interested, every person that's interested to come up. Not just divers, though, shore support people that want to be a part of this. There's always something for volunteers to do. So in May, between Mother's Day and Memorial Day, we're going to have the first event, and it'll be the big kickoff event, and see if we can start getting people up there to do this. So this year, my goal, personally, my task is to get as many divers up there as often as possible doing this and following the protocol. I'm starting a sort of a committee. I've asked a few people that have been really active with the removal events so far to kind of help me out so that we can keep track of the clubs that are involved, keep track of the people that are involved. We're going to start doing fundraisers because I offered to be kind of a stopgap for the funding with the department. The things that we've budgeted to spend, some of the things are going to cost more than we hoped. So I have some money to cover that, but we're going to need more. So we're going to be doing fundraisers. And as I said before, any money that the Watermen's Alliance collects for this goes 100% to the divers. So that's basically it. It's all hands on deck. You know, we want all the divers to go up there. Within a week or two, there will be a red buoy for you to go to. Once that red buoy is clear, the brainstorm idea is that once the red buoy is clear, we'll put another red buoy and we'll change that one to white. So whenever you go there, it'll be the red buoy. Go to the red buoy. The white buoys will be areas that we cleared. Another brainstorm idea was that we can have clubs sponsor a spot. Some clubs, like Blue Endeavors, it appears, has a lot of Reef Check certified divers. So Blue Endeavors wanted to do a more detailed study. They could work with Reef Check to come up with something in a different area and get their own buoy, and that's your buoy, and you go to that buoy, and you're going to follow a different protocol, and you're going to clear that area, and we'll be able to monitor more with your help. So as involved as you guys want to get. You know, but for the next year, I'm going to be doing these presentations with Reef Check, hopefully to push for diver involvement in the crushing and diver involvement with Reef Check. The more involved you are with Reef Check, the better, because going forward in California, you're going to need to be involved with the regulatory process if you want to keep diving. So.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm part of a nonprofit organization called Seaweed Tours.
Okay.
We do education on seaweeds as medicine, and have been watching these changes for, over the last decade. And last year, we're on shore, just in tennis shoes and stuff. We're not divers. And we've been doing eradication efforts with the urchins on shore using, 5-gallon buckets and taking them to a nearby farm in Casper, Urchin farm, and composting them. And I had seen people out smashing them, and my understanding was that, and maybe it was from the perfect storm story, but they're like zombies. My understanding is that urchins can live even if they've been smashed because of their reproductive organs still being in contact. So I just kind of wanted to get a little more into understanding how effective is smashing them versus just harvesting them whole.
Smashing kills pretty good. Even if you just poke a hole in an urchin shell, it'll die. the little microbes, the stuff will get in there and eat it. They're very susceptible to disease and anything, so any little damage to a shell does kill it. The reason people crush them is so that you can see where you've worked. So Tom Ford has been crushing urchin and purple urchin in Southern California for over 20 years, and I think they've cleared 40 acres. And there's never been a recorded breeding event. That was one of the fears. There's never been a recorded breeding event. I've never heard the zombie urchin rumor, but I've never seen a zombie urchin either, so I'm pretty sure that doesn't happen. But like Dan said, these urchin have nothing in them. So, you know, I mean, once you crush them, there's very little, and that also, we were talking about that today, may be part of the study, like, did you see any color when you crushed them? Because if divers are seeing color and you report that, then if something happens there, we know. But, or if all the divers said, no, we didn't see anything, and then there is a spawning event, then we know that they could spawn with nothing in them. But there's never been a reported spawning event from crushing in the wild. And I've been in conferences with biologists. I was in one with NOAA biologists and National Marine Fishing biologists, and Tom Ford was there and other biologists, and all of them said and all of them since that rumor came out have been looking for any scientific evidence that there's any recorded spawning in the wild due to crushing, and nobody can find it. So, back.
Is there an estimate of the population of castor quills? Like, is it?
The density?
Yeah.
A lot.
Like,
There's spine to spine, it's done. One of the things I did want to say is that, like, to dispel a rumor, you know, people think that when we're talking about crushing the urchin or recreational divers or commercial divers helping the situation, people think what we're talking about is commercial divers or recreational divers clearing 100 miles of coastline. And that is absolutely not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, and we've identified several coves that are very, very pronounced, very protected. We can't control what goes on there, but what goes on there is sort of controlled, so we can tell what's going on there. So the idea is to clear these coves. What we proved in 2018 with the help of the commercial divers was that we can clear an area, and that once we clear it, it stays clear, and then once it's clear, that the kelp and other things come back. So a lot of the urchin have moved back into the areas that we cleared in 2018. There's 2019, it was rough, there wasn't a lot of diving going on, but once we clear an area, we've shown that we can keep the urchin out. And that's all we're really trying to do, is protect the area around what's left of the existing kelp forests. So there's Portuguese Beach, for instance, was a big win for recreational divers. It's one of the locals' favorite spots. Actually, on Dan's presentation, he had a picture of divers walking up from Portuguese Beach. So, you know, that was one spot that the locals in Mendocino really wanted cleared. And it's also one of the last very healthy kelp beds standing. So the idea is to clear the urchin away from the kelp bed and then it's out as far as possible and protect that kelp and just let that kelp stay until something else happens to the urchin. The only thing I know of that really clears an urchin bearing completely is either disease or rough water. And that's from other studies in other places. I mean, we can clear a small area, but we have to wait for Mother Nature to take its course on the rest before that kelp can explode out and hopefully repopulate the coast.
Does crushing in Casper Cove require a fishing license?
A fishing license, yes. Yep.
An online question. What would be an indication of success? Is there a certain level of kelp growth that needs to be present?
So we talked about that. Now, clearing an area doesn't necessarily mean that kelp will come back. You know, there may be no spores there or anything. So really, kelp regrowth is the goal. But if we can clear an area and keep it clear, then that's kind of one of the measures of success. So I don't know if lack of kelp would be a failure. We have to know what the reason for lack of kelp is. There's other reasons why the kelp may not grow. So I think what we're just looking for is to try to prove that we can clear an area and keep it clear. And there was a question here?
How do you collect and dispose?
So at the collection events, what we were doing was collecting them, bringing them to shore, crushing them in a bucket, and then throw them in a compost heap. So now with the crushing in the water, we don't have to collect, we can crush in the water, leave it there. Okay?
I understand that there's a similar kelp ecosystem collapse happening in Tasmania and other temperate oceans. What is there to be learned from those other case studies? Is there much international or regional information sharing?
I don't know what the I know there are organizations that are sharing information. Reef Check and I have been in touch with a guy who's trying to get everybody who's doing any kelp restoration or urchin removal, trying to create a database for all of those entities to communicate. I know that that's happening. I don't know how successful it is right now. I know that the people that are involved are very aware of the other studies that are going on, and they're very familiar with the knowledge produced from those studies.
So the plan is to go to Casper Cove, go to the Red Buoy, and smash all the urchins in the area.
All the purple urchin.
Where's the cover?
Smash all the purple urchin and work your way away from the buoy. Yeah. And so that will change. Like I said, by April or May, Reef Check will have a full-blown protocol for what they want. There will be reporting, but for now, because I was talking with the director of the Marine Region today, or the Reef Check today, with Jan Freewald and Tristan, and I need to get divers in the water doing this now. Tonight is the perfect opportunity to come and tell you guys to get out there. So I am not slowing down or stopping for anything. So I worked it out with them. I will throw the red buoy out there. You guys will go there and crush, and then they will design the protocol. And as soon as they design it, I will push the protocol, and I will be asking everybody. And I hope that I've impressed the importance of following the protocol and the reporting requirements. Because, well, it won't be a requirement. The reporting will be voluntary, but if we don't report, if divers are going out and crushing, we know divers are going out and crushing, and nobody's reporting, they will stop this. Right? The only reason they're doing this is to get the data. Will we help? Can we help them out? So if we're not giving them the data to figure out what's going on and why, then there's no reason to let us do this.
There'll be a data gap between now and the protocol, right?
Right. Between now and April or May, there will be a data, but they have historical data, and Reef Check's been doing surveys there for years. So the most recent ones were August, I believe. So they know what's there. And by throwing the red buoy out there and having everybody go to that, we're minimizing the space or the area where people are going to be. We're just kind of focusing it right there. So even if they have a size of this room where they didn't document what was going on, they can say, well, the regulation passed on February 24th, and we went in March 15th, and they cleared 50 square feet. So the information is there. We're trying to mitigate, we're trying to maximize the data produced, but we're also, it's legal now. Anyone can go there and do this. So that's why I say Reef Check can be working nights and weekends for a while, because it's on them to come up with this protocol now so that we can follow it.
So for anybody who has not been there, we go to find out details of the location, depth of diving, water temperature, that kind of thing.
So it'll be shallow. Casper Cove, and especially the south side, is a very shallow area. It'll be a little bit of a swim from the beach, and as time goes on, it'll be a little bit more of a swim from the beach. We will eventually be doing the north side also, which is a little deeper. What I intend to do is approach state parks and ask them to allow me to post a sign on the beach that will inform anyone that just shows up what we want, what to do, where to go. Things like, as much as I can put on, I don't know how big the sign they're gonna let me put up, or if they'll let me put a sign up. I know that the campground probably will, so there'll be a sign at the campground or on the beach for people to follow. There may be an opportunity to fill out the data at the campground, so you don't have to go online for people that don't have internet access. That all has to be designed. But the dive site, the south side of Casper is very shallow. So your tank, one tank should last a long time. That's another thing, subsurface dam mentioned closed. So that was the only place to fill tanks. So when you go up, you're gonna have to bring tanks with you. And I'm trying, and Tristan is trying to work out some way to get a compressor up in Fort Bragg to be able to refill your tanks. But it may be that you need to bring all of your tanks with you to do your dive for the weekend, or you'll have to drive over the hill to get them.
We had another question online here. This is more of a clarification. This is ongoing until May exclusively at Casper Cove for any recreational diver with a fishing license to remove purple urchins.
So the red buoy is till May. This regulation will expire in 6 months if they don't extend it. We expect them to extend it for another 6 months. So we expect this regulation to be for 1 year, unless divers don't follow the protocol. If divers don't follow the protocol, it'll expire sooner, but we expect this to be 1 year. The red buoy that I'm gonna put out there is so that I can tell people now to go there now and just start on that red buoy. When Reef Check comes up with the protocol in a month or so, then we'll have more information about reporting and more information about what we need divers to do or where. But I believe even after that, the directive will be go to the red buoy. What I mentioned about club sponsoring a spot, that would be a different color buoy, and that would be somebody else's area. So the dive protocol will still be go to the red buoy and work your way away from it.
How do we check conditions before driving all the way?
Oh, that's a good question. I use magic seaweed, and then I watch the webcam on the Casper RV park at the same time. Casper RV park has a webcam that looks right at Casper Beach. So I look at the forecast during the week while I'm at work, don't tell my boss, and I compare it to the webcam to see, because sometimes the forecast says this and the webcast says this, or the webcam says this, you know what I mean? So I know that the forecast is off and it's really calm. Sometimes they're spot on, you know, so I do both Magic Seaweed, Virgin Creek, and the Casper RV park webcam.
Virgin Creek is the name of the.
Urchin Creek is the site where the nearest monitoring station is. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you know, I guess, maybe the way long-term, if there's any sort of health transplant ideas happening, or people working on that at all, if that is a viable, thing to work on.
It has been talked about, it has been, it is a consideration, it's just not part of the plan right now. The department has a lot of really bad experience with transplanting things. Bringing something from one area to another, you don't know what the difference in water temperature or water quality or anything is going to do. Like at one point, there was a virus that was on an animal and transplanted and spread a huge virus, very bad. And so if they don't have to transplant, they won't. What may happen is, like say we have that kelp forest at Portuguese Beach, we may use leaves from Portuguese Beach to populate other areas of that zone. That would be the preferred way to do it. But bringing something like from Southern California up here would probably not happen. Actually, there was a project in Southern California where they farmed, where they had students in school raising kelp, and they would grow kelp to a certain length and then bring it out and plant it out in the ocean. Nancy Caruso would get inspired at that project in Palos Verdes. And it was, so their kelp died, and there was no kelp for like 20 years, and then she started transplanting it, and then people started seeing kelp, and they actually complained because they weren't used to seeing kelp. So they like started calling Fish and Game saying, this lady's planting kelp, you gotta stop her. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. We're hoping that the kelp comes back before people forget what it is.
So I don't know, it's the purple's an invasive, causing problems. So you don't have to, you know, they're spraying Roundup along every road. You don't need a permit to dig up blackberries or pampas. Why is there a rule against smashing purple urchins anywhere?
So first thing is purples are not invasive. Purple are a native species to California. What's unusual is the population. They're overpopulated. To answer your question of why, I mean, getting the permission to crush these things, I was literally talking to senators and congressmen to try to get this. I mean, this was a huge thing. I had senators tell me there's no way you'll get that. You know what I mean? It's a regulatory thing. It's in today's political climate, there's no way that the department wanted to do this.
But I mean, if they're doing nothing, why are they getting paid? If all they say is no. You can do that with a piece of paper.
You'll have to ask them. I'm not kidding. That was my theory on that. But another thing, to answer your question though, I've worked with the tribes on this. They've been on the committees, they've been in the meetings where we talked about this. And one of the things that's really important to the tribes and to the people involved with this project is is that we're not trying to demonize the purple urchin. But the purple urchin are a native species. What we're trying to do is help nature come back into balance. Okay, so this is not an all-out war on purple urchin. This is not, kill everything everywhere, go crazy. This is trying to bring nature back into balance at a few locations. Anything else? Oh.
Where should these people be for information? So they have these reporting standards.
Oh.
The regulatory standard changes.
Good one. So I have a Facebook page, Watermen's Alliance Urchin Removal Efforts. And that's where I post everything that I'm doing. That's where I'm going to be promoting the protocol and trying to get in touch with divers. That's where divers can, like, if you want to go out this weekend, you say, hey, I want to go out. Does anybody want to go out? You know what I mean? Or divers can share their experience, like, hey, I went out, I go to the right of the buoy, there was nothing there, so go to the left. So that's where I focus my effort on communicating, other than actual dive club presentations, but that's where I put it out in the public. For a while, I tried like posting it on all the different pages, and then you can't keep track of all the ones you put it on, and then people share it from there, and then so all I can really do is put it out on one. But it is the source for information for these events and this effort. I imagine Reef Check's going to be posting quite a bit of information on it as well. But thank you. That's a very good question.
One is there a way to tell if this year some of the people in them? Then they talk about some of the people that found in the area. And then I guess what you said about the tribal kind of interest, and want to make sure that we don't demonize the urchins. I'm wondering if there's, now that you're putting in the water, is there any thoughts about ways that these urchins can still be used for other purposes like composting or eating or whatever, or is that kind of
Good two-part question. So the first one was the disease. So the ones that I've seen where the shell turns kind of black and some of the spines fall off, so you'll see bald spots on the urchin and it's black or white. That's a diseased urchin. So you can see it. The second part of the question, if in regards to the tribal's concern that we're not demonizing the purple urchin, is there a way we can use these for a purpose? You know, it's actually much more beneficial to the environment to crush these in the ocean than it is to remove them from the ocean and throw them in a compost heap. Because for one, the food that's in, the little bit of food that is in them feeds the tiny little things, because everything is starving on the reef right now. So when you crush them, the fish come in, everything comes in, all the tiny little fish. So everything biological feeds something else. It goes to something. And then the shell, calcium is pure calcium. So the shell, crushing the shell and leaving the shell in the ocean helps reduce ocean acidification. You know, granted a minuscule amount per urchin, but you know, still, it's better to actually crush them in the ocean and leave them there and feed the environment that they're in, and take them out of that environment and just throw them in a hole. What Dan talked about or mentioned with urchinomics, so that's one thing. So they are very interested in, and I'm sure they'll be working with Reef Check to try to figure out a way to get some of those urchins. So what they do is they take them and put them in a pen for 4 to 6 weeks and feed them a special food that they have that bulks them up really fast, and they can sell them for what they call subprime uni. So their prime uni would be urchin that's in the wild, well fed on kelp and tastes like this. And then their subprime uni is uni that they've taken from the wild and beefed up, fed or fattened up. And you know, I had some and it was good. You know, I've had urchin before where I thought like, yeah, there's nothing special about, nothing I would crave, but the urchin that they're producing is really good. So the problem with that as far as we're concerned is that they're going to be kind of looking for a size. So they're not going to take all of them. They're going to want the bigger ones. The people that do remove them for urchinomics are going to have to do it in a certain way that they don't all just crush each other and die. They have to take more care, more time. So there's other protocols that are going to be involved with harvesting those urchin for urchinomics. And like Dan said, it will be a part of the solution, or it could be a part of the solution, but it's not going to solve everything. So.
Yeah, I think they're quite delicious. I mean, they're sweeter and nicer. We've probably eaten like 300 kilograms for the last like couple
The
of months.
urchinomics one.
No,
the regular one?
harvested. And even the ones that are about this size have really got going at.
Yeah.
You know, maybe one of every 20 or so has nothing in it or very little, but a lot of them are fat and delicious and we've really been enjoying them. But yeah, we're encouraging everybody to go out and eat as many urchin and sea vegetables.
Yeah, eat 'em.
Yeah.
All right. Oh,
If we know of some places that would be interested in participating in the ergonomics, how do we make that connection? Is that for you, Dan, or someone?
Sorry, what was that?
If we think that we have maybe some places like restaurants that would be interested in participating in the ergonomics, should we connect them
Yeah,
with you, or is there a website?
Connect you with that.
Okay.
yeah, the thing is that something that you harvest on your recreational license can't be used as commercial product.
Oh,
yeah.
So you won't, I mean, you could gift it to them, but if they intended to sell it, they would get in trouble.
Okay, never mind.
We've had our recreational events, like, we said, bring a truck. You know, people have asked us, can we come and take all you want? You know, so, but you can't sell anything harvested on a recreational license.
My pigs love to eat them.
Pigs love to eat.
I've been right over here.
What are your Japanese friends?
Yeah.
And Greeks and Italians, yeah.
But Urchinomics is available if you wanted to talk to them and see if you can get involved with them or something. They're on our Facebook page. You can look them up. We're doing it. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much.